master's from Ireland in data science and analytics. It was like a one-year course. We'll also discuss about most of you who want to like go ahead and pursue masters. So what can you all do and how can you all like stand out and be different? And post my master's, right now I'm working in Akamai Technologies as a data scientist in bot and abuse. We'll speak more about that as well. So this is just like a brief overview about me. So this is like my journey so far. Like I mentioned, I started off as a computer engineer and I worked in Piramal Finance as a software development engineer one, and I majorly dealt with building like analytics pipeline, and there is a one major project that I worked on is anomaly detection, which also really helped me navigating into what exactly I want to work in. Then I did my master's degree, and then I had a very rough kind of phase, which is a job hunt, which is the most difficult phase because when you kind of hunt jobs offline, you are competing with so many people and not just like your college students. So that is something which will help you stand out. And right now I'm working as a data scientist, so it's like a remote-based job from US. And I work in the bot and abuse team, which majorly deals with helping customers to deal with automated attacks. We will speak about that as well. So next is what are distributed systems. So basically why have I taken this topic is because when you go ahead in your job placements and when you kind of give your interviews and when you work in companies, and I'm sure most of you all sitting here would want to work in tech or like software development or data scientist. This is one architecture that's literally most common and most of the tech companies have kind of adapted to this. So distributed systems in the most simple terms, if I have to explain, is like, and to keep it very non-technical, it's mostly like multiple nodes and multiple computers working together to represent one single machine. That's what we talk about distributed system, like, and all the MNCs, be it man, be it anybody, WhatsApp, for example. WhatsApp kind of works on distributed system architecture, right? Because there are millions of users, and imagine if so many users had to just connect to a single machine. It's not possible because that would lead to server crash, and it's not possible to accumulate so much of data into like one machine, which is why we have different servers. In terms of WhatsApp, if you want to like on a high level design the architecture, there would be an API server, there would be a login server, there would be a database server. So API server would be like, for example, I'm a sender and there's a receiver. So if I want to send a message to somebody, and if the person's not in the same country as me, I want to make sure that the message reaches that person as quickly as possible. So basically, I'm trying to connect to the WhatsApp server, and the WhatsApp server kind of helps me deliver that message. So all this in the backend, it's all happening because of distributed system, because your data is being replicated across many servers. So if there's one node or one machine failing, there are other machines to back it up. That's like a concept of replication. Um, there are three major things that helped me in my journey. So if you see CDN, database clusters, and microservices. So these are the three major things that I worked on. CDN is something I'm currently working on, but microservices is a very good concept. And when you all start working as software developers, it's something that you will come across quite frequently because most companies adapt to that. So I'll begin with microservices first. So in simple terms, if I kind of want to explain what microservices is. So basically when you write a code and you deploy it, it's all under one code base, right? So if you're making something like a Flipkart, okay, so you know that Flipkart has a service where you first, how is the Flipkart journey like? You log in, then you browse, you select some products, you add to cart, you check out, or even if you don't want to check out, you just like hover over the website, you keep browsing, and you do like a lots of activities. So imagine if you, as a student, if you're trying to build something like Flipkart, you might try to build all of this under one code base, which is like fine, like as a learning experience, it's good, but in real life it does not like work like that, because if I have to take an e-commerce example, like I mentioned, there's a journey that a user follows through. So all of this is a microservice concept. Like there will be a separate service just for login, log out. There would be a separate service just to establish your authentication. There will be a separate service just for you to browse through products. There will be a separate inventory service where if you're placing an order, then in the back end, the service would go and connect with the inventory service to kind of check if your product is available or not. So that's like a concept of microservice where everything's happening independently. So suppose if the inventory service fails, the entire website would not crash because it's a separate architecture. So even if, for example, if the inventory service has failed or there's some fault, so in that case, you are still able to access that website, you're still able to access that app. It's just that when you kind of proceed to check out, the product wouldn't be available to you, but you're able to do other activities. So everything's not crashed, and that's exactly the concept of microservices. I've just explained it on a very high level. And then going ahead with database clusters, like I mentioned, there are different databases where your data is stored. So e-commerce has millions of customers, and storing data for all the customers in one database is not like possible. So for example, database cluster would store data for customer from A to F, and the next database would store data for customers from other customers. So there are different database clusters which kind of ensure fault tolerance and scalability also. So when you want to kind of scale your application, this concept really helps. And the next one is content delivery network. This is something that I'm working on currently. So the company that I'm working in, how many of you all know what is Cloudflare? Like, are you all aware about Cloudflare? Anybody? Yeah. Okay, so basically, content delivery networks is like I mentioned about WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is not just like something which is available just in India. It's available all across the world, correct? And it's a US based company. So consider if somebody wanted to make something similar to WhatsApp, that they want everybody across the world to access WhatsApp. But when WhatsApp was originally started, it was a US company, and the server of WhatsApp was in US. So imagine if they didn't have servers globally, and if I'm in India and if I'm trying to message somebody in US, my message wouldn't reach through quickly, right? It would take, I mean, from India, if I want to connect with somebody with US, it would take like a lot of time for the message to be delivered. So this is when content delivery network come in picture. So even if the original server is in US, they have servers all across the world, and that's being managed by content delivery network. They help you deliver your content globally and across the world. And the company that I'm working in is a CDN provider. There are many CDN providers in the market like Cloudflare, Fastly, and Akamai. All these are like CDN providers, and they help businesses manage their websites and app and help them establish a global presence. Going ahead. Okay, so in the overview, I had mentioned that we will speak about anomaly detection. So anybody over here in general has any idea what anomaly detection means? Like anybody? Or have heard about it, or like anything of that sort? You can just raise your hands. I wouldn't ask you questions to explain it, but if you know, you can just raise your hands. Okay, just 1, 2, 3. Okay, so if you all are aware about anomaly detection, it's great. But if you all are not, make sure that after this session you all research more about it, because when you all look for jobs and when you all hunt for jobs, whether be it Big Four, be it Mang, everybody across uses the concept of anomaly detection, and it's just not in one domain, it's in multiple domains. So anomaly detection basically means like finding a very unusual pattern. Okay, in a simple terms, if I want to explain, for example, every day you withdraw 200 rupees from your bank, right? It's like an everyday, but suddenly there's a day where you're like kind of withdrawing 20,000 from your bank. It's kind of, maybe even if you're a real user, but it's not your usual pattern that you follow, right? It's a very unusual pattern that you're following, and it's kind of an anomaly. So that is a very simple concept of anomaly. It's basically finding the most odd thing, or you can say outliers, okay? when you branch out in data science and when you study about data science, you would definitely come across this concept. Um, so it's like I mentioned, it's something that's been used in literally all the fields. So if you've heard about Big Four, there are various jobs like risk analyst or internal audit analyst or external audit analyst or so many jobs that use anomaly detection. Maybe the process and the way of doing it is different, but the overall idea is the same: is to find something unusual, find something that's fraudulent, and help customers deal with it. Um, and these are just the major fields that I've given, but I'm sure there would be like a lot of fields that use anomaly detection. Currently, I'm working in cybersecurity, and yeah, but there is financial fraud, there's manufacturing, there's healthcare, and okay. So before I proceed ahead, how many of you want to branch out in data science and or something similar like data analytics or something like that? You can just raise your hands if you want. Okay. So are you all aware about what is the exact flow of data science? Flow as in when you get the data, how do you deal with data? Like pre-processing, then analysis, then EDA, then applying machine learning. Are you guys like aware about how the data science flow is? You can just like say yes or raise your hand. I won't ask any questions. But yeah, so basically, anomaly detection is something which is majorly used in data science, but not just data science. When I was working in Piramal Finance as a software development engineer, anomaly detection was used there as well. So if I have to explain on a very high level how anomaly detection is used, so basically in the company that I worked in previously, it was a finance-based company. And the thing that they used to do is they used to build APIs for clients. You all know what APIs are, right? Like it helps connect client to server and it helps establish communication. So we used to build APIs for our clients, and that's when anomaly detection comes into picture. So for example, I am a developer and I'm building these APIs and I'm giving it to the clients. And the clients are using our API to perform their activities. But with the help of anomaly detections, we would kind of monitor the APIs that we have built, because we can't just build APIs and give it to the clients. We want to know that the APIs that we have built are functioning nicely, or is there any sort of issue. So for that, we used anomaly detection in the sense that whatever APIs we are building, for example, there is a client who makes like 100 requests in a day on our API, which is good. Like that's like the usual pattern the client follows. But suddenly in a day, the client is making like 1,000 requests in a minute, which is quite unusual, and it's not something a human would do, like making 1,000 requests. So in that case, we monitor these APIs to understand if it's the right authorized person using your API and it's not being abused, and it's not like an unauthorized person using your API. Again, it's like one of the examples of anomaly detection. There are a lot of examples, but I just wanted to explain in like general what exactly anomaly detection is. And I really hope like after this session you'll search more about it and like kind of try to build some projects related to this, because right now in the market it's the most booming thing, and it's really great to have like a project on this. Um, okay. Going ahead, I will explain about what I'm currently doing and what my work is about. So, like I mentioned, I'm working in the bot and abuse team. So, bot and abuse is basically like I mentioned about CDN. Okay, it helps deliver your content widely across the globe. And the company that I'm working in is a major CDN provider. So we have different clients like Nike, Adidas, all these clients, and they are using Akamai CDN. So when I speak about using Akamai CDN, what I mean is when I am trying to browse Nike's website, okay, and I am a legit user, so obviously I will be able to browse Nike website. But consider if it's like a bot. Bot is something which is like an automated script or an automated browser trying to access your website. So if I'm a normal user and if I'm browsing a website, it's well and good because it helps the company. I would like go ahead and purchase the products. But if it's like a bot would make like thousands of automated requests, which is not really profitable for the business. So certain things that a bot would do is like I am a user and I'm actually going through the Nike website, I'm navigating through the Nike website, I'm adding products to cart, I'm checking out, I'm doing several activities. But what a bot would do is like it would kind of scrape everything from the Nike website. It would try to do attacks like credential stuffing, DOS attacks. So that is not really profitable to the business, right? Credential stuffing is like it's a cyber attack where if your passwords would be leaked on dark web or something like that, and a bot would try to fetch those passwords and continuously try to log in on your account, like try different combinations of password and log in your account and try to maybe uh, do something from your account, like an attack or something like that. Or if it's like a bank account and if they get credentials for your bank, then they might perform certain activities like withdrawing money or something like that, which is why bot and abuse is a separate department. I'm not saying it's a department in every company, but it's one of the major concepts in cybersecurity that is being used to kind of detect any sort of automation or prevent any sort of automation. If I have to give one more example of an automation is basically a flight website. If I want to fly somewhere, the most natural thing I would do is like go on Google and check for the most recent flights, or I would go on any flight website and I would try to like book a flight or check for flights. But a bot would kind of scrape everything from your flight website, and it would for example, if there's a competitor, right? Like we have Make My Trips, we have TripAdvisor. So what these agencies do is that they kind of scrape all the flight prices from your website and display it as their own flight prices. But actually, these are not their own flight prices. They're actually fetching those flight prices from the original website. So there are some good bots and there are bad bots, but bad bots are harmful for the business because if there's a competitor who's trying to do that, obviously the major traffic would be navigated to the competitor and not like your business. So, and we don't even realize, but in every day there are a lot of automation attacks taking place. So I work in the bot and abuse team, and what I try to do is analyze if any customer is facing such bot attacks. We try to analyze it, we try to understand from where it's coming, and we kind of try to block those requests. So that's the most simplest flow. And yeah, the way the method that we use in this is anomaly. We kind of try to find the most unusual pattern, the most unusual request, and we just kind of block that request. So nothing is reaching, nothing is harming the business. So that's what I do. The first point that I've mentioned is traffic analysis. So what I mean by traffic analysis is that if if there's a website where a lot of users visit, so in that case the traffic would be high, right? Because there are the websites getting like a lot of requests. But in the same time, it's not just legit humans who are trying to access the website, but there could be like bots or there could be somebody who's trying to actually do some sort of cyber attack. So even they are trying to access that website. So our job is to distinguish which is a human and which is a bot. Right? If it's a human, we let that request pass and we let the human access the website. But if it's a bot, it needs to be immediately blocked. And how we do that is there's a straight up process. So when I say that, if you all know the data science pipeline, what data science does is it fetches the raw data, it does pre-processing on that data, it does some visualization on that data, it puts that data into the machine learning model, and then it generates insights. So that's like the most simplest data science flow, and that's exactly what we do in the bot and abuse team. So whenever the request metadata reaches us, we try to understand the pattern of the request. For example, if I am using Windows, okay, and on my Windows, I am accessing www.flipkart.com. So in the Flipkart backend, there will be my information, right? Like this is my IP address. This is how I'm accessing Flipkart. I'm using my Windows operating system to access Flipkart. Additionally, Flipkart would also have my device information, like what is the language I'm using, what is the accept language, what are the headers. So this is basically how your device is connecting with the website, and Flipkart would have all that information, and the backend knows that if the request is coming from a Windows device at this particular hour, and these are the credentials and this is the IP address, it would let your request pass. But for example, if it's like a bot, so a bot wouldn't make a request to a website using Windows. If you know, there are Python automation scripts being written. If you will have studied about web scraping and all, so web scraping is basically like an automation script that is written to kind of access that website. So if I'm trying to scrape a website, or if I'm trying to access a website using automation script, so in that case, my information would look different. There wouldn't be an IP address. There wouldn't be a device fingerprint like Windows or Chrome or your browser information. So in that case, we kind of help distinguish between a human and a bot. And we apply models like anomaly detection, and we do some sort of behavioral modeling. What I mean by behavioral modeling is like, again, as a user, your journey on a website is like you open the website, you do certain mouse clicks, you perform certain events. For example, if I want to log in on a website, what are the actions I would do? I would click on I would do like www and the website name.com. The website opens. Then one event is like logging in. One event is like entering your password. One event is like after you enter your password, the website appears to you. One event is like you're hovering over the website. Another event would be like you are searching through some products. You add some products to your cart. So these are like multiple events being generated in case of a legitimate user. Basically, it's like a sensor data. Like your backend analyzes if there is a sensor data being generated or not. Like sensor data in cybersecurity is called as telemetry. So it would see that there are certain mouse clicks, the user is hovering, there are events. So this is a normal user being doing this, like a human doing this. But in case of bot, there is no telemetry. Like you're not generating any events, you don't have any sort of mouse clicks, you're just like you're running a script and the script does the job. So you're not actually interacting with the website, and in that case there is no sensor data. So it's pretty evident that if there is no sensor data being generated, it's a bot and it's not a human. And that's how we kind of distinguish between a human and a bot. We kind of try to understand the behavior. A normal human would just not like click on a product, click on 200 products together and check out. It's not a normal human behavior. But if we see that there are 200 products clicked in like a specific time frame, in a time frame of 1 minute, it's not normal, and it's like an automated script being running. So that's how we distinguish based on behavior, and that's like a concept of anomaly detection to help understand what's normal and what's not normal. And then after we understand that this machine learning model works, we go ahead and we deploy it. We will speak more about the deployment technologies that you guys should know in the further slides, but this is the work that I currently do. Okay, and we spoke about distributed system, we spoke about anomaly detection. So if you kind of merge it, it's like distributed anomaly, because even if whatever anomaly detection you're performing on the entire website, which is being deployed across different servers. We spoke about CDN, right? CDN helps you sort of deliver your content across multiple locations. And that's what distributed anomaly detection does. It helps you analyze data across the globe and helps you detect unusual patterns and then provide insights. So there are different concepts in that load balancing we spoke, like we have different, it's not just one node or one server doing the job. there are multiple servers, there are multiple nodes. Your data has been replicated across all nodes and all servers, and that's what load balancing does. We're not overwhelming just one server. We are making sure that everybody handles equal amount of load. So if something fails, your entire website or your entire app is not crashed. Streaming pipelines is what I mentioned. We have there is a data science pipeline where you fetch the data, you pre-process the data, you feed it in your machine learning model, and you provide insights. Streaming pipelines is more like constantly fetching the data. We have so as you all go ahead and you all try to hunt jobs and you all look out what technologies are needed in the job market, you would quite often see something like Kafka. So is anybody aware about what Kafka is? Like you all can just like raise hands. Like ever heard of Kafka or know what Kafka or RabbitMQ is? Anybody? No. All are aware? Okay, good. So you all know what Kafka is, and it's something that would be very often used when you all start like actually working in jobs. Kafka is like a streaming platform. I explained the WhatsApp example, right? Like I am a sender and I'm sending a message. So my message is picked up by the server. It's inside the Kafka queue. There's something called as producer and consumer, right? So producer would fetch your data, and there will be a consumer who would read the data and would deliver your data to your receiver. So all the backend process that happens through Kafka, and there's also another technology for Kafka which is RabbitMQ, but Kafka is something that's most like often used. Like Netflix and all works on Kafka, so it's great to like know Kafka and like do some projects because it's the most in-demand technology right now in the market. And then we have central data processing. So like we spoke about distributed system, there's central data. Central data is basically like distributed is like all across, like different nodes and different machines doing your work, representing as one single machine. And that is what central data is. Central data is like it would fetch your data from all over the globe, and it would try to analyze a pattern. So if I spoke about Nike, if Nike wants to know in which region they have the maximum amount of customers or in which country they have the maximum amount of customers, they would have to do something like central data processing. They want to understand the trends, they want to understand what kind of customers are purchasing what kind of product, what is the most in-demand product. So in that they would need data all across the globe, and that's what central data processing does. And then we have the feedback loop. Feedback loop is something like constantly tuning your machine learning model. For example, right now, one machine learning model works for your business, which is great. But the data is very volatile and the data keeps changing. So in that case, you just can't use the same machine learning model always. You have to keep tuning your machine learning model. You have to change your hyperparameters, your learning rate. And that's like a feedback loop. Like it's always an incremental thing. You keep incrementing and you keep changing your model based on the current scenario. So now we will speak about the technologies that made a difference to me, which I think can also make a difference for you all and something that you can adapt to and learn. So in terms of Python is the most popular language that is being used. There's Java, of course, there's Java, Spring Boot as well. And I know a lot of companies also don't use Python and use Java Spring Boot. So if you're somebody who loves Java and who's very comfortable with Java, then I would definitely recommend you all to like also study about Spring Boot ecosystem, because that's something that helps build majority of websites and majority of applications. But personally, from my experience, I've worked on Python, so it's something that I can speak about much more confidently. So Python, and if you want to branch out in data science, obviously NumPy, Pandas, TensorFlow, all these libraries are something that you should get accustomed to. And right now online also there are a lot of resources, and if you're somebody who wants to, because I've worked in development as well and I'm now working in data science, so I can say that these are the major technologies right now that's being widely used in the market. Then going to Kubernetes and Docker, we spoke about deployment, right? So when you work as a software development engineer, you're just not like writing the code and testing the code. You're building the entire pipeline. You are writing the code, you're testing the code, and if the code works fine, you're also deploying it on production. So how do you deploy it? And that's when Docker and Kubernetes and Jenkins come into picture. So if you're aware about something called as CI/CD pipelines, uh, Kubernetes and Docker kind of help with that. So if you aspire to like get into core development, you need to know about Kubernetes and Docker. You can always take on some hands-on training. There are a lot of resources online where you can just try to establish Docker on your computer and see how it works and deploy and integrate Docker in your code base and try to like deploy it on some free online. There are a lot of resources, there are a lot of websites that help you do free deployment, so you can always like try with that. And then we have Apache Kafka. I spoke about Kafka. It's a major streaming platform that's been widely used right now, and not just in software development, but it's something which is majorly used in data engineering as well when you build your data pipelines. So I would definitely recommend you all to know Kafka. It's okay if you don't know RabbitMQ or any other technologies that work similar to Kafka, but I would definitely insist that you all study about Kafka, and not just study, learn how to implement it, because it's a little complex implementation. But once you get the hands-on and once you understand what exactly a producer is, what exactly a consumer is, it's a simple concept. It's fetching the data and then delivering the data to the receiver, right? And that's what producer and consumer does. And then there is a zookeeper which helps kind of perform all, like helps the producer to work and helps the consumer to work. It's the background concept is really simple, but when you all like go and implement it, it's a bit complex. But definitely it would take efforts, and if you kind of actually put interest, it's like really interesting. And cloud platform. So I've worked with AWS and Azure, and AWS is something, and Azure as well, but I've majorly worked with AWS. It's something that majority of companies use, and it's not just being used as a cloud platform, it's also being used to kind of store your API keys, right? So if you are building a code base and if you are kind of using some API in your code base, like any API which has an API key, you cannot expose that API key directly in your database and deploy that. You need to kind of store those API keys somewhere on cloud, and then through cloud fetch that API key using some placeholder, and that's where so AWS has S3 and Athena and Lambda and a lot of concepts which you can go ahead and learn. There are certified AWS courses. They're paid, but they're really helpful and they really add a lot of value to your profile. There are different cloud certification courses as well, and I would definitely recommend you all doing if you all really want to branch out in cloud, because more than Coursera and more than Udemy, these certified courses kind of help you add value. So I would like definitely say that please invest like time in studying AWS. And GCP is something that I've not worked with, but when I speak of cloud, these three are the major cloud providers. So you all can like pick the ones that you all are most comfortable with and go ahead and study it. The next thing that I will speak about is the job hunting. So before I speak about that, I would explain about how easy and difficult both it was for me. So when I completed my engineering, we had our placement started from like fourth year, right? And even you guys would. And we used to have like a lot of placement courses, and we had like placement coordinators who would help us, and there would be like on-campus companies coming, because we had everything online. So our tests were online, our interviews were online. But I would say like back then it was still easier to get a job, because A, everything was online, and B, when you have on-campus placements coming, they kind of always pick up students. Like you would end up getting job. At least scenarios back then were different. Scenarios right now are different. I'm not trying to like scare you all or something, but I can personally, like, I just want to be the most honest right now and not tell you all like, you know what, it's easy and you will get a job, that's for sure you will. But getting a campus job and getting an offline job, there's a lot of difference, because campus you're just competing with your batchmates and just you guys right here. But when it comes to offline, it's like there are so many people. Even if you open LinkedIn, you would see like there's so many people looking for a job right now, and it's very difficult. So I got my first job from a campus placement, and I would say I got that pretty late as well. It wasn't something that I got like in the first month of campus placements. I think I was the last person from my, I wouldn't say my batch, but from my circle who got placed. So it's constantly like learning, and when you also prepare for campus placements, it's not just like you're preparing for programming. If you know programming, it's not enough. You need to know the architecture, you need to know how to build systems, you need to know you need to know operating systems. There's so many things, there's so many concepts that you need to know and study, because the most common questions in most software development engineering interview is not just coding, but also they ask you to design. There is a designing round where they will give you like, you know what, design a Flipkart website for me. And that designing is not using coding, that designing is how you design using your, like how you make the flow of the website. And you just can't say that you code the website, you deploy the website and you have a login, you have products, you have browsing. That's not enough. They want to know the backend, they want to know how will you incorporate load balancing, how will you incorporate data clusters, how will you manage streaming pipelines, batch pipelines. They want to know all of that. So I would definitely recommend you all to every day like pick up some company, any company you want, and just study their backend process. Like how is their backend built, what are they doing, what technologies they're using, just to understand the backend architecture of that company. And that's what I would recommend. I'm not saying that know how to code or something like that, but just understand the backend flow. And so speaking about my journey, so after I got my first job, I think I got my first job in Feb or something, Feb 2022 or something, and I started working in July 2022. And it was more on the development side, it was more on the backend engineering. And post that, I worked in that company for 1 year, and then I went for my master's. So I did my master's from Ireland. Why I chose Ireland is because it's a 1 year course, and I thought that things would quickly happen. I don't have to wait, like invest 2 years. And it's in a very financial aspect, it's a little easier on the pocket as compared to other countries like US or Australia or all of that. I'm not saying they're bad, but I'm just saying like at that point my mindset was more like saving time and getting things done quickly. So I thought it's a 1 year course, I'll go do it and then I'll hunt for a job there and I'll work there for 2 years. That's the planning I had in my mind. So immediately after my job, in September 2023, I went to Ireland and I studied there for a year, and I completed my master's in November 2024. So I thought that immediately after master's I would like immediately get a job, but it's what we think and go, it's something that does not happen. Like sitting here, we would feel like, we do masters and it's easier to get a job, but it's considering the current market scenario, it's not. Like it took me 8 months to land my current job. And I would tell you why it's difficult is because firstly, I didn't go with a lot of experience. I just worked for a year and I went. And I realized that all the people over there who had come to Ireland, my classmates, they were all of the same profile as me. So basically, how are you standing out in the market is also important. I mean, if there's just one job opening and if there are like 100 people like you, it's going to be really difficult. That why should they hire you? So something that I would recommend you guys to do is when you right now, I'm sure most of y'all would like take campus jobs, or some of y'all would also go for masters. But one thing that I would recommend is whether you go for masters or whether you take up a job, make sure that you build a very solid profile, make sure you do quality work, make sure you work with technologies that are really in demand in the market. And not just that, even on a personal level, make sure you build your profile in a way that how different it is from somebody else, because the market right now is very saturated in terms of data, in terms of development as well, but right now in data and data science, data analytics, it's really saturated. And Ireland is a very small country, and I was in Dublin, it's a city in Ireland, and it's smaller than Mumbai also. And there are so many people going there, so obviously they don't have that many jobs to create. They have limited jobs, and if you want to like go and grab those jobs, you have to make sure that you are different. So in that case, like do a lot of projects. There is Kaggle, like pick up any data. If you want to get into data science, just pick up data and keep building machine learning models, keep tuning those machine learning models, build your GitHub, keep your GitHub the most active is what I would say. More than doing courses, something that I would recommend is just keep your GitHub active. Make sure you have the maximum amount of commits on your GitHub, because that's something that recruiters see. Recruiters don't just see that what experience you've done, they also see, other than your experience, what extra you're doing to make yourself stand out. Do a lot of research projects. Do projects in a way that you want to like publish it. So take up some topic. Vidya Lankar, I'm sure, has a lot of help they give if you want to like go ahead and publish your papers. So have like publications, make your projects, pick up something from Kaggle. If you're into development, try building something of your own, or even if like like refer to YouTube videos, but just try doing something that would help you stand out. And most importantly, from now onwards, just try keeping your LinkedIn as active as possible. Don't make it a dead account. I made these mistakes during my time, and I realize it now that how important it is to have a public presence, how important it is for people to know what kind of work you're doing, and how important it is to have a lot of contacts with recruiters. Personally, I never did this because I thought it's an easy journey. You study and then you get a job, but there's honestly a lot of things that go into it. So I don't want that you guys make the same mistakes I did. So keep your LinkedIn the most active, because that's a major job marketplace. There's a concept of cold emailing, which I'm sure most of you know. Cold emailing is like you are actually trying to reach out to recruiters and you're pitching yourself to the recruiters. So try doing that from now onwards. Keep building contacts with HRs and recruiters. I didn't get a job for 8 months, and like after the 4th month, I realized that just applying for jobs is not enough. You kind of need to make sure that people recognize you and people know that you exist in the market, and people know that what work you're doing is significant enough. So whatever job you're applying for or you're looking for, go on LinkedIn, go on that company, look out for people who are working in the same team or who are doing the same job. Text those people, reach out to those people. I'm not saying reach out in the motive of just getting a job, but reach out with the motive of just building a connection, just to know them, to understand them, because people recognize all these things and they keep this in mind. So if there's a vacancy happening, they would know that yes, this person reached out to me, and they get back. And this networking part is literally the most important strategy about hunting a job, because after your campus placements, when you actually go offline and look, and when you switch jobs, you would like actually realize how difficult it is. I'm not saying it's difficult for everybody, but in a majority basis, it is difficult, because when you open LinkedIn, you realize that there are so many people looking for jobs. So that's what I would say. Build contacts, cold email. There's also a website called as apollo.com. It's a website where you get emails of all the recruiters of every company from any part of the world. You just need to enter the company, and you just need to enter, if you know the name of the recruiter, you would just straight up get the email. But if you want to find out the recruiters, you can just go on that website and you can just type in their profile, like data scientist or software developer in this team, and you would get a list of all the people, and just take out their emails, keep their contacts, keep emailing them. Make your work being seen is what I would say. Even if you're doing quality work, make sure it's being seen. That's why I said keep your GitHub active. So, and master your interview is in the sense that keep giving a lot of mock interviews. there is interview bit. There are a lot of websites online where you can like practice interviews. There are a lot of websites coming in where there are AI interviews taking place. Like you're just interacting with AI, and AI would ask you questions, and you're just answering the questions, and AI would rate it. So master speaking, because your more than your even as much as your technical skills are important, how you communicate and how you pitch yourself and how you make yourself being seen is also very important. So keep doing that. Don't think like you have an interview tomorrow and you would just ace it. You would ace it. I'm not saying you wouldn't, but there's always good to have practice. So keep doing that. And I mentioned about tailoring your story. So make sure your LinkedIn, your social presence is like active, and you whatever contributions you do or whatever projects you make, keep posting it on LinkedIn. Whether you get reach or not, but just keep your LinkedIn active and build as many connections as possible. Not just LinkedIn, there is Naukri, there are a lot of other websites. But LinkedIn is like a major place where people actually go and check your profile. So yeah, do that, because I didn't do this in my early age. Like the part where during my master's journey, I just focused on completing my master's and like getting done with it, which I feel is a mistake that I did, because you when you study, it's not just like studying. You need to be versatile with all these other things as well. So I don't want you all to make the same mistakes. So just don't focus on studying your syllabus. Also focus on doing multiple other things, like participate in hackathons or do as much as you can to make yourself stand out, because it's in the end it's the efforts that would count. And yeah, so the if I have to wrap up, the key takeaway from here is whatever you're learning right now in your computer engineering, operating systems, distributed systems, data science, or whatever. If it's, I'm not saying it's possible to have mastery in everything, because it's not possible, but something that you're really interested in, pick your niche and go become an expert in it is what I would say. I didn't think like I want to get into cybersecurity or something like that. It's something that happened very naturally to me, because like I mentioned, when I was working in Piramal Finance, the projects that I worked in were not completely cybersecurity related, but I did anomaly detection, and I did projects that I felt I could tailor as per the domain. So right now I'm working in a cybersecurity based role, but whatever you are interested in and whatever you feel, you can branch out and just become an expert and keep putting efforts, because the market right now is really saturated and it's really like bad. And it's much more worse for freshers, because because even it's worse for experienced people as well, but it's more worse for freshers, because it would take you a lot of time to build your presence. With experienced people, they can at least tailor their CV that they've worked here for so many years, this is the kind of work they've done. But for freshers, it kind of becomes more difficult, because in the start you have to put a lot of efforts, and once you get in, it's going to be like, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it at least once you get into something, you would have your career going. So that's what I would say. And everybody over here uses ChatGPT, so when you apply for jobs also, just don't keep the same CV for every job, because every job is different, their requirements are different. So if you apply for something with the same resume, you will obviously get rejected. So whenever you apply for jobs, make sure you tailor your CV as per the description. So for example, if a job requires Java, but you are uploading a profile with Python, you will get rejected. So if you know that you know Java, make sure you tailor your CV as per that. Keep multiple versions of your CV. Put the job description or ChatGPT and ask GPT to kind of tailor your resume as per that, and pick up points and just keep tweaking your CV, and don't keep a standard CV. And make sure that when you start, you have projects in like multiple domains. Like take a healthcare project, take a finance project. You guys would soon do your final year project as well, so make sure you invest a lot of time in that and go ahead and publish it, because when you sit for your interviews, your placement interviews, you can like pitch in those projects. So that's like the key takeaway, and yeah, that's about it. And I think I'm done. So if you have any questions about like if you want anything like masters, job hunting, skills or something like that, you all can go ahead. If you all want any suggestions or anything of that sort, yeah, you can go ahead and ask.
Any questions? Harsh? I have a good question.
Hello, myself Shreya Satish.
Hi.
So, would you suggest any good starting project on anomaly detection to work on hands-on?
So I would suggest there's Kaggle. So if you're aware about Kaggle, you can just go on Kaggle and pick up any data, pick up any card transaction data or any data that you want. Or you can just enter anomaly detection on Kaggle and you would get like a lot of Python notebooks. So you can pick up any notebook, you can pick up any data set, you can see what they're doing and what extra you can add. And after you're done with that project, also keep your Kaggle account active. Like immediately after you do the project, put that there's an option where you can post that project and make your own notebook on Python. So when somebody else, like for example, if I want to come back and see some anomaly project, your project would appear and I would see and I would clone your project. So that would make your profile, enhance your profile much better. So Kaggle is there a lot of other websites, but I would suggest Kaggle because you also have the code there which you can refer if you're starting new. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And also post on GitHub, commit it on GitHub, keep your GitHub active, and like I said, LinkedIn as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't want to bore you guys with all this, but yeah, just
So I have one question because many of them are planning for MS
yeah.
or majority will go for job, but then the remaining chunk will plan for MS. So looking at the overall scenario of USA in today's day, what you suggest? Is it a good option to think of going in Ireland? And what are the different options available if they want to take MS and complete their PG from Ireland or any other country? Specifically from Ireland because you have that
Yeah.
experience. So what will be your feedback on this?
Okay, so speaking of Ireland, I initially mentioned Ireland is a very small country, and in Ireland there's only Dublin where majority of people go and majority of companies are established because all European headquarters are established in Dublin. Like all over the Europe, all like LinkedIn, Facebook, Meta, Meta, not Facebook. All their headquarters are in Dublin. So in Ireland, it's just Dublin. It's just one city, and it's smaller than Mumbai also. So like during my time only there were so many people who went, and the next batch also that came there were so many people, and it took me like 8 months to get a job. So I would suggest if you are aiming for Ireland, I wouldn't recommend going there immediately after your bachelor's. I would recommend that you all work here for a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, and do some extraordinary projects or like go in seminars and establish connection, and then go to Ireland because right now it's a really bad scenario there as a fresher. And you can not just me, anybody who's from Ireland, you can just speak to them on LinkedIn and they would like tell you the same. Ireland does give you a 2-year work visa, so after it's a 1-year course and post you're done studying, you get 2 years to work there and also hunt for job. But if you don't have a job, it's financially very straining to kind of wait there. So yeah, I would recommend that if you're aiming for Ireland, don't go immediately, like establish your profile and then go. In terms of USA, we all know there are a lot of issues been happening. So I don't think I'm the right person to speak about USA, but my personal opinion about USA would be like it's a very volatile situation there. Small mistake and you are being deported back to your country. So and there are a lot of visa issues also happening. Ireland in terms of visa is much more secure. So, but if you really want to go to USA and if you have the budget and if you have the like all the resources to go there, you should. But again, it's a matter like don't go there just with like no establishments or no profile. Like keep working on yourself, keep doing projects. One country that I know is really booming right now is Australia. I have a lot of people who are in Australia right now, and they're doing really great and they have a job. But it's a bit expensive. But if you're looking for options, so Australia is something you can consider. But Europe, like Ireland, Germany, right now is a very tough situation. Yeah.
So I have one question. In the current scenario, how the tech world is right now, does master really is the masters really worth it? Like, will they look more at my technical skills and my technical depth, or do they actually need a master's degree from me?
Oh, that's a good question. So, to be very honest, it's not, because I felt like if I wouldn't have done masters and like just switched my job in India, I think I would have been in a better, like I would have got a job immediately. I'm not saying that I regret doing masters. Obviously, I branched out into data science and I got to learn more about that. But it's mentally very stressful, because when you invest so much money and then you don't get the outcome, it's more of a mental pressure that you have, and then you also have your family that you have to be answerable to. So I'm not saying like doing masters would give you the best job. It's not like that. If you keep working and if you keep changing jobs and keep building a diverse profile, it would definitely, like so many people I know have not done masters but still are doing great in their careers. So yeah, I wouldn't say that masters is the only, like something I would definitely recommend.
Also, after this BTech coming from a tech field, how do you compare MTech with masters in a management field or a finance field? How do you compare it?
So management is more like management is completely like non-tech, and you once you get into management, you wouldn't ever get to go back to tech. Like if somebody asks me now, maybe some years later, I would want to get into management, because you don't want to like do keep coding and do tech forever. So I wouldn't say it's bad, but once you get into management, you wouldn't have the hang of tech. Like you would completely be off a tech profile and you would be branching out into something new. But yes, definitely, if you do tech for some years and then get into management, maybe you would get, if you personally, it depends on a personal choice. If you want to work in tech, I wouldn't recommend immediately getting into management. But yeah, maybe after some years you can plan like an MBA or something like that.
Hello, ma'am. So, I have a question.
No ma'am, please.
So, ma'am, in the PPT, you have mentioned that we have to build a scalable project. So, if any person want to opt a career in AI/ML engineer, so what type of project he should focus on?
Yeah, good question. So basically, there are different. Sorry, there are different machine learning models. For example, you might have studied about supervised, unsupervised, semi-supervised machine learning. So if you're somebody who's just starting with machine learning, you can pick up a supervised machine learning project. Supervised is like there is X and there is Y, and you already have the X and you're just predicting Y on the basis of X. So, like I mentioned to her, you can just pick up something from Kaggle and you can start working on that. Supervised is something that is the most starting point of ML, and then there are, in advanced level, there is neural networks, there is image classification and all of that. But I would say in start, you can start with like a basic CSV data, and yeah.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am. It was a great session. My doubt is right now we have options for honors. Right now, our specialization is in AIML. We have options next gen AIML, cybersecurity, data science, IoT, blockchain, etc. After hearing your session, I'm interested in both data science as well as cybersecurity. And one more is that as the specialization is in AML, so we can continue by taking the option next gen AML. So what do you think? Which honors would be better according to the market demand?
Okay. Can you like repeat the options? It's cybersecurity.
Data science,
Yeah.
next gen AML,
Okay.
IoT, blockchain, and UI UX.
Okay. And what is something that personally interests you a lot? Like, do you see in cybersecurity also there is AI? Like right now, what I'm doing is data science and cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is like a domain, but AI ML are skills. So it depends on what skills you want to acquire. So are you more interested in data science, or like is there anything else that you're more interested in? It actually depends on personal interest. But speaking of the market, I would say if like there are as many people are doing, there are a lot of people who are doing data, but there is also a big saturation in data. So if you want to take up data science and ML and all that, it's a really good thing to have an extra specialization, and I think it's a good initiative. And if you're really interested in data science, then I think you should go ahead with AI ML, because that would cover the entire data science pipeline and help you kind of know what exactly happens in data science and how you can build different models and tune different models. And guys, please don't call me ma'am. I'm just like 2-3 years elder to you, so please.
Thank you.
Hello. Uh, yeah, yeah. So companies like Capgemini offer masters in correspondence.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on doing that or doing masters solely?
So masters in correspondence is more like it's a more secure thing, because even if they, I think it's more like they sponsor your masters or something like that, right? Yeah, I think it's a more secure thing, because if you go for masters and you do masters, and imagine in the worst case scenario you don't end up with a job, so you at least have something to fall back on. You have your job back here that you can always come back to and work. So I think it's a more secure thing, and I really feel it's like a good initiative. But it's also kind of more restrictive in the sense that after you do your masters, you have to just like come here and work. So it depends what country you're aiming for, and it depends on the current market scenario, and it depends on your profile. If you feel you're confident enough that you will immediately get a job, or it wouldn't be that difficult, then go ahead and do masters solely. But I think in correspondence with a company is definitely a much secure option, because you can always change. Like even if it's a restrictive thing, you can still work for some years and you can always change. You're not having a career gap. So with the current market scenario, I would say that not having a career gap is more important. So yeah, that's a more secure thing to do.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Uh, During the presentation, you talked about studying different companies' architecture.
Yeah.
Could you uh, talk about the sources where you could study?
Yeah, so you can just go on LinkedIn and you can use the hashtag distributed systems or scalable architecture, and you would get like a lot of people posting about how different companies backend work. Or Medium is one great source. So just make an account on Medium and just type the architecture that you want to study, and you would get like a lot of information and resources on that. But a very good source is LinkedIn, because a lot of people keep posting about all that on LinkedIn. So you can just search it via hashtags and you would get it. And yeah, YouTube and all is also there, but LinkedIn is like more detailed and more internal.
So I believe, any more questions? Okay. So looking at the overall set of questions being asked, so I believe that all were attentive, and I hope that जो आज का session हुआ is definitely going to help you to finalize your domain, or maybe honors, or maybe going for any project. So first and foremost, a big thank you to our alumni, Riddhiva. who has moved from our lecture halls to virtual lecture halls because that time COVID आ गया था. And then now she has moved to the world of data science. So the clusters aren't just classrooms but the actual data nodes. So we truly appreciate you taking the time to share your experience, your wisdom and the real world examples related to the applications and how to tap upon the different industry and to be industry ready and how to outstand as compared to other individuals. So I'm really thankful to each and everyone who has attended this session, as well as again a special thank you to Ridhima, and we also have a special connection because she was also part of CSI, she was also part of TEDx, and truly even in that online world, the batch extremely did well, and she was one of the sincere students of that batch. So thank you Ridhima, thank you so much. So looking at the time, we will be conducting the quiz or the activity related to the guest lecture today in classroom. For division A, a separate link will be provided. For division B and C, so right now B is there, which will start not at 11:15 but maybe at 11:30, and followed by division C at 1:45. So please be present because 2 ISA activities would be conducted in the classroom itself. So thank you everyone, thank you for joining today's lecture. Thank you.
Thank you everyone, thank you for being here and